The number one piece of advice I'd give any entrepreneur is to have conviction in your vision.
Daniel Sachs in a room with 10 other guys, but it's 3 years. There's no revenue. How can you even maintain conviction of your vision?
What are your biggest funding lessons?
Number one, raising VC money is not for most businesses. Number two, if you're raising VC money, you have to understand the dynamics of your investors. Number three, the reality of running a business is regardless if it's big, small, funded, non-funded, you always are just dealing with problems. The faster you fail, the faster you'll find success.
How do you even go about finding a co-founder?
To build something big, to really add value, is there luck involved at all, or is it all sheer input? What is the difference between a founder and a company vision that becomes a unicorn and a founder that burns VC cash and eventually implodes? That's the question we're going to be answering today, joined by Daniel Sachs, who started a unicorn at AppDirect, has been featured in Forbes, spoken next to Justin Trudeau, and started a new company, Landbase, that raised $42.5 million to help companies find their next customer with AI. I'm joined here by my co-founder at Workflows.io, Fivos Oresti, and we're going to be asking Daniel the questions that we want answered in this stage of our founder journey, and we're going to be getting the insights to help other business owners and growth teams out there. So, pleasure to be joined by you, Daniel.
Great to be here.
I guess it's good to start off on your story, how you came to start AppDirect and eventually Landbase. But I think you started AppDirect at 22 years old. So how do you start a future unicorn at such a young age, and what led up to that?
I think the best companies are very mission driven, and there needs to be something in the person's background that drives them to solve this pain point. And for me, it was growing up in a family business. I grew up in Niagara Falls, Canada, and my great-great-grandparents started Sachs Furniture, which was on Main Street in 1908. It was part of my family's identity. My grandfather was born in the attic of the store, and my dad sold furniture and managed the store, and I grew up, playing in the store. And just at the time that I was graduating university in 2009, the Great Recession hit. And my family's furniture store, after 100 years in business, went out of business. And that drove me to really want to help entrepreneurs. At the time, the future of entrepreneurship looked bleak, and there was a position where every business on Main Street would shut down. There'd be no digital business, as it didn't exist at the time. And, just big companies like a Walmart would take over. And at that time, I actually visited San Francisco and learned about SaaS in its infancy. And I said, if these SaaS tools could be distributed to businesses like my family's, then you could have a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem again.
And so for those who don't know, what exactly does AppDirect do and solve? And this is Daniel's first company.
Yeah, AppDirect is the largest commerce platform for selling technology. So just like you can go to Shopify and buy physical goods, you can go to AppDirect and buy business services and technology. We're one of the biggest sellers in the world of Microsoft 365, AWS, CrowdStrike, AT&T Mobility, any type of B2B business service. And we do over $3 billion in annual gross merchandise value, servicing millions of businesses around the world.
I mean, that sounds like a complicated business to run. So how did you do that at 22 years old? And what led you up to that moment where you had the guts to just bet on yourself and do it and eventually become extremely successful?
Yeah, at the time, it was the Great Recession, so you couldn't get a job. So we just said, I always thought, okay, I needed to go to investment banking or consulting, and then I needed to raise capital, but there's no better time to start a business than now. So really just started it out of the apartment with high conviction and just ran at the vision and ultimately made something from two guys in an apartment.
Walk us through a bit before. So you were 22 when you first started AppDirect, but before you started at McGill, right? So walk us through what were you thinking during uni? And did you always know that, okay, straight after university, I'm going to start a company? Or was it more like you just couldn't find a job and said, okay, I have to just start something and figure it out?
I always thought that I'd go into family business. And then when that was not available anymore, I always wanted to be entrepreneurial, and it was just a matter of time.
Did you have a job in between graduating, or you just graduated university, started AppDirect, and it was because most founders end up having jobs or failed businesses, but You had a very successful business at 22. Like, what do you think the difference was there as well? Like, what made you successful at that time?
Yeah, no, I just ran at it. My view is that the number one piece of advice I would give any entrepreneur is to have conviction in your vision and to not be afraid to fail along the way. So it's that conviction in your vision that's going to drive you to achieve the objective that you want to see. And the best entrepreneurs I know can visualize 10 years out what their business is going to look like. And along the way, you're going to learn, you're going to fail, you're going to iterate. The path to get there is not going to be the same. But I could have told you from that apartment when I was 22 what the business would look like as a unicorn at, years later.
And how was getting your first customers through the door like?
Really, really hard. So I had this angel investor, Eric Boyko, prolific entrepreneur in Canada. And he used to always just repeat, first customer, first customer, first customer. And like the point on that would just be to focus on getting your customer. And our approach was, from my family furniture store experience, I said, like, my dad or my grandfather are not going to go online and search on Google and find FreshBooks or DocuSign or whatever it might be. They're going to want to go to their local IT provider and just buy it from them. Or they might go to some other trusted provider. And what we found is that telecoms around the world serviced every business, and they have a lot of trust. So they'd be well situated to cross-sell. So the first kind of customer we sold was a massive enterprise, Bell Canada, the largest telecom in Canada. And it took like a year to prospect into them, a year to get through legal, a year to launch. And throughout that period, the business could have, failed at any point, but we just kept strong with a conviction. And weeks up to this launch with Bell, after getting the team together, getting the whole product together, one of our first apps in the Bell business app store was Shopify. They were tiny at the time. And we launched with Bell, and Bell had said, like, you're going to be on billboards, you're going to be on commercials. This thing is going to break. Like, it's going to have so much traffic that it doesn't break. But we launched, and like crickets, not one person came. A month later, Harley, the president of Shopify, sent me a message saying, WTF, the Bell Business App Store has less traffic than my intern's blog. And like, that's part of entrepreneurship. Like, we worked 3 years for this moment and like nothing. But we had conviction in our vision, on a first principles basis. We said, like, why isn't this working? And we tried to dissect it, and we took those learnings, and within a very short period of time, we sold Deutsche Telekom, AT&T, Vodafone, and they had a ton of success. So it was learnings from that failed experience that allowed us to go big and learn.
Let's run it back. So you said around 3 years is what it took you to go from zero revenue to start generating revenue?
No, it was longer, probably. Yeah, it was 3 years to launch with Bell, and that was a failed experiment, and we didn't get that much revenue from them.
And how many employees did you have in the meanwhile, that period?
It was like a team of like 10 people working in a room this size, and it's a small room, no windows. We were grinding at it like every day. And leading up to that launch, we spent like 72 hours in the office, like servicing our vendors and getting everything ready. And there was this moment where we saw in the Facebook movie, you like launch and then things go up and to the right. And we thought we'd have like tons of users coming and like literally nothing.
So I'm just imagining now Daniel Sachs in a room with 10 other guys, but it's 3 years. There's no revenue. How can you even maintain conviction of your vision when there's no revenue coming in the door?
So you really need to have your own view of what's driving value. And our philosophy was, if we can get SaaS, which is growing really fast, in the hands of millions of businesses, that's going to work. And the learning that we had from Bell was that you can't use legacy marketing strategies like billboards and television commercials to drive digital business. So we took that learning and we then brought that lesson to our next customers, and they were ultimately successful.
And so what were you doing to drive traffic back then?
What we found is that the thing that built trust for these telcos was their sales reps. So if you're a business that was buying telecom services, if you can enable that rep to talk about cloud, that's what made the difference. And we created tools and technologies and training to enable that local rep to go into a business and say, here's how you use cloud and SaaS. And that unlocked billions of value.
Interesting. And so Shopify was one of your early customers. So did you ended up actually driving value for them?
No, they backed out and then we didn't work with them again.
Wow,
But
they still found their success.
yeah, they still found their success.
And what was the inflection point in AppDirect's journey that was like it became a unicorn? So was there like a specific moment that you felt all the stars were aligned and things started moving super quick?
So if you take that third year, like we had no money in the bank, we were running our VC capital, and we actually had like a few months runway. And Deutsche Telekom had tried to build what we had built, and it cost them a fortune. They had like a team of maybe 50 people plus building, and they had a huge conference. It was called the CeBIT conference with like tens of thousands of people, Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, on stage, and the CEO, Renee Oberman. And they had months to go before the launch. And they found us through the Bell launch. And what they realized is like, you have the exact tech, and it's like exactly what we need. So out of necessity to keep the business alive, I put a price on the table that was far more upfront than what I had done for Bell, and not expecting them to take it. And essentially they took it, and that not only kept us in business, it fueled us. And then from that, it was like a multi-million-dollar contract. From there, we went triple, triple, double, 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 which at the time was the path that was best in class to become a unicorn. So 3 years near-death experience, and then like explosive growth.
And I feel like a lot of businesses have that moment as well, where it seems like they find their stride. And like, what do you think the dynamics there? You're just figuring stuff out for a certain amount of years, and you figured enough things out that you reach that inflection point, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you think the biggest businesses out there had like a slow burn. I don't know. What do you think in general? Other business owners out there who are waiting for their inflection point should be thinking about.
One of my friends and mentors, Jim McKelvey, who is the co-founder of Square with Jack Dorsey, he wrote a book on this called The Innovation Stack. And he studied that all the best businesses that have true innovation failed multiple times. And there was like near-death experiences. So my lesson to entrepreneurs is accelerate that near-death experience to be really, really fast. The companies that are growing today at unprecedented rates, I call them vibe AI companies. So it could be a vibe coding company like Bolt or Replit or Lovable. These are the fastest growing companies in history by a far margin. But if you look at the genesis, they failed a lot of test cases until they succeeded. And you could take that back to any company. So what I think is interesting about being an entrepreneur today is you have the tools, technologies, and instant feedback loops to fail faster than ever before, which is why you're seeing these explosive growth companies grow faster than ever before.
So it's about stacking failures so that you can basically find the win. And if you stack enough failures, it could be a big win.
The faster you fail, the faster you'll find success.
That's one for the books. I think we wanted to talk a little bit about funding, because the only thing that got you through those first 3 years was funding. So I think you've become quite the expert fundraiser. You've raised nearly $1 billion in funding across AppDirect and Landbase. So I guess, like, first and foremost, what should founders who want to raise money be thinking about in terms of like raising money in a way that benefits their company and not getting screwed over by the term sheets, et cetera? Like, what are your biggest funding lessons?
Number one, raising VC money is not for most businesses. So you really have to gut check if you want to and are motivated by raising VC money. Number two, if you're raising VC money, you have to understand the dynamics of your investors, which is ultimately they're willing for 9 out of 10 businesses to fail for that one to return the fund. So number three, if you want to return the fund, you need a huge idea with a massive TAM, and you need to showcase that you're going to dominate that industry. So to raise VC capital, you actually have to be kind of crazy or risk adjusted, because ultimately you should know that like there's a 90% chance that you're not going to see value. So that's why I think it's a fiduciary duty to my investors to bat out of the park, to be that one outlier company. Inherently, to do that, you need to take an insane amount of risk. But my view on risk is it can be calculated. So if I can fail fast and learn and iterate, I'm going to be closer to success. So really, I'm like honing in always on, I have this huge vision, this huge TAM, and if I can be the fastest person to capture the market, then that's going to be a 10, 20, $50 billion outcome. And that's the game I'm playing for. And I can't for a second doubt myself to say, hey, if I could make this decision to make it a lot safer, but a lot less big, I'm never thinking about that. I'm always thinking, how do I push so I can return the fund for my investor?
Okay, so now you got me and Dan in front of you. We're 25-year-old, both. Okay, so we were questioning ourselves: should we go and raise funds? Should we bootstrap our new business? What should we do? So obviously, there's pros and cons to whatever you do in life, and I think this applies to business as well, right? In when it comes to raising money or not. Talk to us. What would you suggest me and Dan do? Do you think that raising money is the answer, so you can build something that is insanely big and it can grow into a unicorn, or do you think that for people that are, let's say, more early in their journey, it's just better to bootstrap and possibly fail and then go for the big play? How do you think about that?
I respect all forms of entrepreneurship. And I think that you guys have, with workflows, an insane opportunity for a cash flowing service business. And that's incredibly magical. So if you have the opportunity to capitalize on a vision and an experience that you're super passionate about, there's nothing wrong. And in fact, you can make more money yourselves in running a cash flow business. I know multiple Forbes cover billionaires that are virtually bankrupt because it was all paper money. They leveraged maybe to buy a house, and the stock tanks, and there's no value in their equity anymore.
What
So
do you mean? You said Forbes billionaire cup. So they're billionaires when it comes to on the cover of Forbes, right?
on paper,
On
they're
paper.
billionaires, but have no ability to liquidate the stock. And you can think about these magazines, they're a point in time, right? So you could get valued. Companies right now are getting valued at $1 billion, $3 billion, $10 billion. But until you have a liquidity event, which is either an IPO or an exit, um, the founders may never take money off the table, which means, and they may also generate very small salaries. So you could, on paper, be worth 100 million or $1 billion and lose it tomorrow. And that's the game you're playing in the venture space. And you need to recognize that inherent risk.
AppDirect hasn't exited yet, and it's a massive company. Did you manage to grab secondaries? And I know you might not be able to speak about all of this, but like you went into the VC game twice. Of course, you saw a new opportunity with Landbase, but like, how have you played the game? And do you think that there's ways that you're playing it better than other people?
I don't see it as a game as much as creating value. And with AppDirect, we had such conviction that this was going to be a multi-generational business that we never saw the exit as the goal. We saw the goal as just building something massive and impactful. And my co-founder and I'm lucky to have a co-founder that's still running the business. So I was able to start AppDirect because my co-founder took the CEO role and is running the business. So I have complete trust in him and the leadership team at AppDirect that they can take it another 10x and another 100x and build an enduring business. So I'm not so worried about the exit per se. I'm much more focused on that business continuing to drive value to businesses, which it ultimately has, year on year. And that gives me likely the opportunity this time to take an even bigger swing, because ultimately my motivation now is like, how do I make something that's even, potentially bigger and more impactful?
You mentioned something about trust with your co-founders, right? And that's something that actually is, a lot of people are struggling with. I was very lucky to find Dan, and I found him through my old company. So we were working together. We knew our working styles, and we knew that we match, and that's why we started this new business together. But I think that one of the biggest problems people have, and they don't start a business because they don't have anyone to start it with. So how do you even go about finding a co-founder?
Ultimately, with Nick, my first co-founder, we were just like you two, living in an apartment, shared values, had known each other for a long time, and we're running at this problem. And we spent like a year just iterating and visualizing and thinking about what this would feel like and thinking about what we would deliver. And that time really allowed the business to kind of set the right foundation. And the first thing I did at AppDirect was like finding our technical co-founder. And ultimately, I wanted to find the best person in the world. And we attracted Andy Sen, who had built the Salesforce App Exchange. So the only person in the world who had built like an app store, which we wanted to build. And that was like the X factor. And then the three of us really came together and made the thing work. With Landbase, similarly, Emily Zhang, my co-founder at Landbase, she actually wrote the Harvard Business School case study on AppDirect back in the day when she was at Harvard. And I got to know her through that. She then went and ran eBay's first AI and ML projects, then went to Carta early days, which eventually became a decacorn, and then co-founded Oyster, which was one of the fastest unicorns. So having known her and her experience over 10 years, complete trust. And then we brought in Hua Gao, who's pretty much like the only person in the world who had been doing ML and reinforcement learning, Stanford PhD, started Everstring, which is a Sequoia-backed company that got sold to ZoomInfo. So the three of us, like complete trust. And I think that you need to start from a foundation and then every day continue to build. So even though AppDirect, I'm now at Landbase, I was just with Nick and the board last weekend, still a board member, shareholder, we're very close. And, over time, your roles change. I know, each of you have similar skill sets, but I'm sure you're going to have to figure out like, what is your superpower? What's your superpower? How do you divide and conquer? And that's an evolution. And it's like a marriage. So you have to be open-minded about where you're at, what your motivations are, because trust needs to continue to be built, and you need to make sure that you're all leveraging your highest power.
In terms of partitioning those responsibilities and operating in your zone of genius, how much of it comes from like what people enjoy, or how much just does it come down to like people's natural talents and skills? Like, did it always work out in the way that people wanted it to, or did one person always have to do the job that they didn't want to just to keep the business running?
I got this advice from a BlackBerry exec because Nicholas and I ran AppDirect as co-CEOs, and he said it worked really, really well until it didn't. And therefore, I was really self-reflective of the fact that, I'm going to do some things, he's going to do things, but as soon as it doesn't make sense to have a co-CEO model, I'm going to be the first to kind of step back and say, like, let's rediscuss the roles and responsibilities. What happened with Nick and I is like, arguably, I could have done product, he could have done design, he could have done sales. We were very similar, but we kind of identified that I would be external, meaning like sales, marketing, business development, travel, and he would be internal, product, R&D, running the office. And not because of our passion or experience, but just because we started that way. He went super deep in R&D and I went super deep on the external. And that really worked. As the business got bigger and bigger, we actually had to reframe ourselves, where it was more that I was running the monetization side of the business and he was running the procurement side of the business. So it was more business unit focused. And then at some point it made sense to have one CEO. And I said, okay, I'll manage the transition and then I'll start something. But I think being very true to yourself, your skill sets, your opportunities, and what's best for the business, and always be willing to reevaluate the structure is what can enable a business to scale.
We can circle back to some of these other topics, but let's talk about Landbase. So you have a big company with AppDirect, and I think you've described your mission with AppDirect is to help businesses reach other businesses through a partner network, and then your goal with Landbase is to help businesses directly reach other businesses with go-to-market, outreach, and omni-channel basic marketing strategies. So what was the vision there? How did you get inspired enough to start a new company? And what's the vision like?
So ultimately with Landbase, we're helping businesses find their next customer and execute campaigns that are going to help them generate revenue and grow. And ultimately, the biggest thing you could do for a business is either generate revenue for them or save them time. And with AppDirect, we were so impactful at enabling businesses to have access to technology that will allow them to grow. And for those software vendors that worked with us, that was a direct distribution channel to generate revenue. And with Landbase, I wanted to take my learnings from going to market and building a massive revenue company, and be able to use agentic AI, which really takes action based on data to help automate a lot of the challenges that we had in our go-to-market.
And before we go deeper into Landbase, so I'm just trying to pull myself in your situation. You have a company that is worth more than $1 billion, and you decide to not retire, not start, not just be an investor. You decide to start another company with an even more ambitious goal. Walk us through that. Why would you even go at this again?
I'm very mission oriented and I love helping entrepreneurs. And look, I think my dad always said you have to always be working, otherwise you're going to lose yourself. And I, in transitioning from AppDirect to Landbase, I had a period of time where I didn't work. I loved it. I was like thriving with my kids, traveling around the world. So I actually think it's not because I have to work, it's because I want to work and I want to drive this mission. And I think that my motivation the second time is to make more impact than I did the first. It's a little bit of a chip on the shoulder, a little bit of an opportunity. But I think that there's never been a better time to start a business. And there's never been a more important time for entrepreneurs to step up to solve the world's biggest problems. And I'm really motivated by that.
Does it get easier or, the second time round, or is it always just super difficult? Because I guess that's why people ask that question is like, this stuff is hard.
It's always hard and it never gets any easier. The reality of running a business is regardless if it's big, small, funded, non-funded, you always are just dealing with problems. And that's ultimately what you have to get excited about. So ultimately, anytime there's a problem that's thrown at me or anytime that there's an opportunity to fail, I've trained my brain to get super motivated by that because that's going to bring me closer to success. And the best entrepreneurs I know are ones that accelerate their speed of learning and that also throw themselves at the problems. That's the difference between an entrepreneur and someone who works at a company, is that the entrepreneur can't choose what to do. They have to take on the biggest problems. So ultimately, I found myself in any role doing things that are maybe very mundane or repetitive or gaps, or that I could hire someone to do. But ultimately, you need to throw yourself at the biggest problems and also be aware of the gaps in your business and jump in.
So I want to circle back to that later about, I guess, what the characteristics of a successful entrepreneur are. But let's talk a little bit about Landbase. So you mentioned before the Lovables of the world, the Bolts of the world, and your vision with Landbase is to have a similar experience, but for a very specific domain. So were you thinking about that stuff at the same time that those companies were going to market? Did you get inspired by them? And, how does this play into the overall vision of how you want to make Landbase a category leader?
Yeah. So when I started in Silicon Valley in 2009, it was right when SaaS was emerging. And there was this beautiful period of maybe 4 years between 2007 and 2011 when most of the multi-trillion-dollar market in SaaS were created. So you have companies like Box and Dropbox and DocuSign and EcoSign and Shopify and MailChimp, and all these companies were just people in their apartment. And what was interesting is even though the software market then was a massive market, I could identify this new cohort of companies as the ones that were going to be the next thing. Similar to how today, with the possibility of AI and specifically agentic AI, in my view, there's going to be some of the fastest growing companies of all time created. And I wrote an article in Forbes about a year ago that talked about how the user interface is going to change, the business model is going to change, the value points are going to change, might be more outcome based, but because we're in this transition, it's unknown to know what this will look like. So right now, in retrospect, we can go back and say, this is what a SaaS company looked like, and this is what a on-prem company looked like. I think today, I'm starting to see a semblance of what an agentic AI company is going to look like for the next decade. And that I really define as vibe AI. So you can put information into a chat box in natural language, and it can execute and orchestrate full workflows automatically, guided by a human, that previously would have required a ton of software, a ton of humans, and a ton of data, and a lot of data loss. So the first category that I think is doing this very well is the vibe coding companies, and that only emerged in the last 12 months, even like 8 months. You also see other categories like vibe search, so Perplexity doing this very well. You look at OpenAI or with ChatGPT or Anthropic with Claude, they're like AI chat or vibe chat. But I think every category is going to have a vibe company, and that's really defined by this prompt-based interface, executing agentic workflows that would have been what humans do across different data sources. And oftentimes the secret sauce is going to be having some form of domain-specific data or models that allow them to have expertise in the given field.
So you see the lavables of the world that have grown to hundreds of millions of dollars in annual recurring revenue in a couple of months. You see Cursor that has replaced teams of engineers, and now companies are just hiring very senior engineers to just do the job that previously would require a lot of humans to deliver. So that's exciting and scary at the same time. So coming back to Landbase, do you think that a platform like Landbase will eventually replace humans?
So ultimately, I find that in any tech cycle, you're going to have part of what a job used to be replaced, but you're always going to find new needs for future roles. So the way I think about it is in the agentic AI era, anything that a human does in front of a computer screen with a mouse could likely be automated in a better way. And that means that like 80% of the job of an SDR or some of the inside sales teams will be replaced. However, that doesn't replace the need for trusted human relationships or like having an eye on brand. So I think that humans will actually be more important. But I think what's going to happen is business will go back to the way it was 20 years ago, where you're doing business through relationships, through going out, getting to know someone, getting to know their pain points in person, in real life. So I think that the view of AI could be very dystopian, where we're going to take over all jobs, people are going to be unemployed. It's like a bad view. I think it's actually going to be great because I think who likes to work in front of a screen for 10 hours a day, slaving, moving a mouse? It's actually really bad for your brain. So I think a lot of what machines will take over in this wave of technology are roles that had only existed in the last 10 years because technology wasn't advanced enough to actually do the work for you. What I say with Landbase is you shouldn't have to work for your software should work for you. And ultimately, agentic AI is enabling software to work for you for the first time.
I guess there will be some, market shifts. So if the SDR who's sending cold emails all day is replaced by Landbase, well, that person could focus on human relationships, but you may have value created with software. And so there's just less space for those people who are focusing on human relationships. But I definitely don't have a dystopian view that AI is going to replace all jobs. But what I do think, and I want to hear your take on this, is that you see, I think it was leaked, the Zapier CEO's email to their whole company. You have other companies sending similar emails where basically AI is just going to increase the bar of what um, a good team member is. And a team member who knows how to harness all the tools and 10x their productivity is going to be golden on the market. But a team member who isn't that efficient, who wasn't maybe a top performer in this era of SaaS and tech, is kind of going to be eliminated. So do you think it maybe is going to increase the bar of what it takes to be a good contributor to a team?
Absolutely. So a company is default dead by nature. Most businesses fail. And it's your job and your fiduciary duty, if you're running that business, to make sure that the company isn't dead. In order to do that, especially in the tech business, the biggest lever is having very efficient headcount and getting the most out of your organization. But you know what? The companies that are best to work for are the ones that expect the most out of you because you feel like you're crushing it. If you work at NVIDIA today or Microsoft, it might be a big business, but man, are you excited about the mission because you know you're making impact because the company is crushing it and it's getting recognized. If you look at NVIDIA or Microsoft, they are aggressive on talent. They're stack ranking, they're force distribution, they're always up-leveling talent. And I think that sometimes legacy businesses, traditional businesses, family-owned businesses may feel like it's ruthless to manage talent, but actually it's the responsibility of a business. And therefore, I believe you always owe it to your team members to be expecting the best out of them. And that's what creates insane and amazing culture. And with AI, there's a massive expectation shift, which is if you can harness these tools, you for one person can impact what used to take 10 people. That is motivating for that one person. Now, those 9 other people can choose to step up and make something, or they can find a different role somewhere else where hopefully they can make more of an impact. But I think that those 9 other people will be able to find in this environment other things that they can do. And I think that this job change is not unique to AI. The same thing existed when cloud came out. The same thing existed when the Industrial Revolution happened. There's inherent change. So I think it's our role in society to figure out, how do we retrain people? How do we get people motivated to be their best and live up to their best? Because that's what pumps people up. And a lot of what I saw in my family's business is that the pride that owning your own business has gives you purpose in life, and it drives you. And what motivates me about helping entrepreneurs is that when I go into Walmart and I see the greeters, they're not all happy. But if I go into you guys, or a startup, even if it's a grind and even if it's hard, you see this motivation and purpose that you get from work. So I hope to live in a world where people can find purpose with work, and that's likely more entrepreneurs or more people working at companies where they expect a high bar out of you.
At the same time, I think that not everyone is designed by default to be an entrepreneur, and not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. So now, starting our workflows with Dan, we have, what we're seeing is that we need to train people, but you also need to motivate people and at the same time manage people. So how do you find that balance? You at AppDirect, I think you have 800 employees, right?
I think we're at like 1,200 now.
1,200, okay. And how many Landbase?
50.
I think you're the best person to ask this question. How do you even think about motivating employees?
I believe ultimately in a values-based culture, defining values that you can align your team based on, and then setting very high expectations and expecting a high bar. And it goes down to that philosophy that I treat my team as if they are mini CEOs of their departments. They each have a clear objective. Every year, quarter, they can articulate that objective. They know how it's measured, and they feel accountable over that, piece. And inherently, if you bloat your team, you have too many people, it's very hard to hold someone accountable for one thing. So I think the key, in my view, and this wouldn't apply to every company, but it's treating your team as if they're the mini CEO of their goal, giving them goals and allowing them to fail and encouraging failure and encouraging them to learn, and also giving a very clear career path of how they can grow within your company. And if a company is growing 10x, there's always going to be roles for individual people to get from one place to another. If a company is flat, it's a lot harder. So I think that I have an inherent advantage in the companies that I'm in. They're generally growing, which means people can step into more opportunity. And people who have worked with me have gone on to do insane things. Max Rhodes, who was one of my first interns, is the co-founder of Fair, $10 billion company. A lot of past app directors have gone on to start their own big companies. Christophe Levesque, who was one of our first engineers, was the architect at Trip Actions and Avon, $10 billion company. So I think you want to give people an opportunity to learn, to fail, and then know that even if they leave, they're going to have great opportunities, elsewhere.
I think that when a company is growing, you have a more clear vision and a clear path for them that, okay, this is how you're going to grow. You will be managing X department. You can keep going in the individual contributor path, that you can become a manager. But what about early on? Because early on, you don't know what you're going to need in the future. So how do you motivate them with, okay, this is going to be your path here, when you don't even know, because you're 7 pivots away from finding what your company will actually do. So how do you think about that when you first start out?
I think the most important thing you can do as an early team is hire the right people. So taking up a lot of time, and you don't want to sell people based on perks and equity and people who love, all these things. You want to find people who are motivated by the mission. And in, the companies that I've worked in, anyone in that founding team of 10 would literally take a bullet for the company and would want this business to be successful, beyond anything, and they will it into success. So I think that it comes down to motivation. If someone is motivated by your vision and mission, and they're willing to sacrifice everything for that, that's the best form of motivation to build something big. Now, that's not sustainable, but I see the two of you have that. You're working 6 days a week. You're in your prime. You could be out at the beach. You live in a great city, but you're choosing to do this work over all else. And it's because you have the motivation. It's an intrinsic motivation. So the thing that I would look for in an early team, beyond any skill sets or experience, is like, does this person have the intrinsic motivation to fail extremely over a long period of time to ultimately, you know, have the potential to see that success?
But I guess there is an element here where the goal of Landbase is to become the #1 Vibe AI GTM platform to help businesses find new business. So it's a huge mission. But what if like there's a lot of great businesses that don't have the vision to become a category leader, especially if you're um a bootstrap business. You might just want to have happy customers, a good team, a good team culture. So do you think um, getting team members to believe in the company enough that, as you said, they would take a bullet for the company? I know that's a figure of speech, but do you think it's a prerequisite to have such a huge mission, or there's ways to frame a smaller mission to still be enticing to an early team?
I think it depends. So one philosophy I have is that you can find purpose in any role. You know, you speak to a doctor or a researcher or a professor or, you know, many different types of people. They truly feel like they were born for that role. And I think that's amazing. And sometimes in Silicon Valley or in the media, people portray some roles as being better than others. But ultimately, I think you could be happy and motivated in certain environments, and that's amazing. So I'm not saying that you have to be the CEO of a tech business. Ultimately, you know, everyone should seek to be happy. But what I do find is that if you want to create purpose, you need to make sure that the people that are working in your organization are motivated by the work that they do, not just the paycheck. And you're right, not every business can do that, but I would personally, you know, seek to create an environment in which people are motivated by the craft. And, you know, last night you talked about how you just became addicted to the work because you were generating revenue for people. You could tell that there was like a dopamine impact by getting value and delivering a result for someone. And I think that you could probably grow a team based on that same thing, which is training them about like, hey, look at the impact that you're making. So it's always about the motivation. It's easy for Elon Musk to say, hey, we're going to put someone on the Mars because that's a big vision. It's a lot harder to say, how do you find people who are super motivated by generating leads for businesses? But like, that's pretty cool too.
Yeah, no, you make a great point. But in terms of those early hires, there's this big debate of like skills versus mentality. Um, how do you navigate that? Like, do you hire a very experienced people? I know like your co-founders of Landbase are extremely experienced, but in terms of like your team members, are you happy to hire someone just out of university who has a spark that you just see potential in them, or do you value experience?
So I've studied this extensively, but if you look back to a lot of the best businesses of all time and kind of shareholder value, they tend to be founder led, and they tend to have a founder that had a very clear vision, and defined values. And there's no right or wrong values, but it set the path for how a company would grow. And I think ultimately that is like the spark, is that you find a set of people, you set a vision, and you have values, and you ultimately like fail fast. And that's where the magic happens. So I would put all my efforts, you know, especially in the early days, of just honing in on having a really clearly defined vision and rallying people around that vision.
In terms of like actual experience though, like what do you prefer? Hiring someone who's done the thing that you're hiring them to do for 10 years, or the person who's a 24-year-old who's like, I'm going to work 2 times as hard as that person, but to be honest with you, I've never done this in that, I don't have as much experience.
Yeah, similar to what I was saying in terms of the values, like you having defined values is important. I think like you can have any type of team composition. Like I'm just as worried as the team of 24-year-olds that don't have any experience in them, because you don't know what you don't know. So I think that it's your job as a CEO and founder to compose a team, and you likely need a mix of different things. So I'm not going to start a tech company if I have no one in my founding team who can be a best in the world engineer. But it's all about the composition of the team, how the team gels together. If you look back to, you know, the PayPal Mafia, a lot of the reason why that company was successful was because of very homogeneous culture. They all were aligned on a lot of things so they could focus on running at the problems within the business. You look at other companies that just have like culture because they hire people from all different walks of life or experiences or ages or culture. So I think there's no one way to build a business, but you have to be methodical about who you're bringing in, the culture you're setting, the values you're setting, the mission you're setting, and it's your job to always be leveling up.
So you're basically saying there's no right or wrong way to do it, but if you hire the 24-year-old who's going to work super hard, you need to create a culture and environment to bring the best out of them. And your culture and environment might actually be better suited to the person with 10 years of experience, depending on how you set up the company and what the vision is.
That's exactly it. The only thing that I'd say is I've never seen a multi-generational like outlier business be built with mediocrity. So you need to have a very high talent bar and you need to expect the best out of your people. And what I've learned from partnering with some of the best organizations in the world for building a high performance team is that you need to set a bar high, hire incredibly ferocious people who want to crush it, and then you need to level up that bar all the time.
And in terms of the lifeblood of a successful founder, one thing that I've noticed is that there's some people who are built different. And there really is such thing as as talent, and I think that's kind of like a black pill that um, you have to accept. And I think like there's that Stanford comp sci student who's building a tech AI tech startup in his dorm room and manages to scale it, and it is just like success at first attempt. And then there's founders who struggle and maybe never build a great business, and maybe both are equally as hardworking. And so I really believe that any skill with anyone who's in able health can be learned with enough effort and time. But at the same time, there's the intangibles, there's the talents, and what do you think are the most important um, intangibles in a successful founder? And that's not to say to demotivate someone if they feel like they don't have those intangibles, but rather like what do you think the characteristics of a successful founder are across all the scenarios that you've seen and what you've maybe seen yourself?
I think if you're ultimately crazy enough to want to create something huge, you need to play the odds and understand the odds. And ultimately, the odds of creating a decacorn are far fucking higher in San Francisco than in Barcelona. So again, it's not that everyone needs to be a billionaire, but if you want to play that game, you want to stack the odds in your favor. So you could look at, Eric Schmidt, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. They were all born within a few year period. I think it was in the 50s. And they all had access to a computer being on the West Coast. So there's reasons why, if you just think about the stats, there's reasons why people will have these outsized returns. Now, I'm the last person to say that being a billionaire or starting a decacorn or a public company is going to mean that you're happy. It's not for everyone. But if you're crazy enough to want to and be motivated by creating something huge, then you can play the odds in your favor. So if you look at it, yes, Stanford produces a ridiculous amount of talented people who are going to go on to start amazing businesses. And VCs know that. It's their job to invest in companies that have a high likelihood of success. So if you look at like per capita, per anything in your background, I bet that Stanford engineering is going to be the highest chance of creating a massive company. So that's where the money's going to flow. So if you're in high school right now and you're technically inclined and you want to fucking crush it, you're going to stack your odds a lot higher to go to Stanford engineering. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't start a huge business if you don't have a Stanford engineering degree, but you have to know how to think through those odds. And then I think in terms of team composition, I'm methodical about how my team evolves. And what I found is I want to mix high technical talent. So we have like multiple Stanford people, top degrees, Stanford PhDs. We have a NASA data scientist, people from Meta, but then we also have people with high founder density. So these could be like killer salespeople that started an agency and then wanted to join us. So we actually have at Landbase over 1/3 of our talent is founders. 1/3 is highly technical, which would be defined by a professional degree that crushed it. And then we have probably 1/3 that's very specialized in the domain. You could say best in the world at X role. And I'm very methodical about that talent mix. And then the expectations I set and the values I set for that team.
So you mentioned Stanford. You yourself, you went to Harvard, so you know how generally this ecosystem works. But if you were 18 again, would you would you go to school? Would you even consider getting a degree? Because now with all the advancements in AI, you can just start a company, and I think the younger people are actually better equipped to start and do something, because this is just, everything is so new to everyone. So after all this experience that you've accumulated, do you think that going to school is worth it?
I've seen 17-year-old, 18-year-old founders who I would say, I'd put them on my level with my level of experience. So I think age does not define your ability to start a company. I do think that there's only some people who are wired to really make it work. And then you also have to apply the risk. So if you're a 17-year-old and you want to start a business and you are okay with taking the risk and okay with failure and you feel like this need and conviction, then fucking do it and you'll probably crush it. But if you have a little bit of doubt in the back of your mind, oh, what if I didn't go to college? And what if I, don't have this degree? Or what if I didn't do this? Then entrepreneurship's not for you at that phase. And what I find is it's actually much easier to be an entrepreneur younger, because if you follow the path of like going into a good school and then, getting a job in investment banking or consulting, and then you go to, you're working at Goldman Sachs, then you go and you get your Harvard MBA, and then you get a job in private equity, risk adjusted, you're never going to be able to drop out to start a business because, at that point you're making a couple $1 million a year. Probably if you're living in New York, you're actually spending over a couple $1 million a year and you just can't take the risk. So I met a ton of Harvard students when I'd go speak to those classes who all said, I want to start a business. 90% of them go into investment banking or consulting because they're getting those offers. So I think you have to be very convicted that you want to be an entrepreneur. And you have to be risk adjusted, which means you have to be a little bit crazy in order to do it.
But what are you going to suggest to your kids to do? Would you tell them you have to go to Stanford? You have to go to uni?
I think you should do what feels right, and you have to follow your journey. And there is no one right way. For my kids, the last thing I want to do is tell them to go to a top school or to start a company. I don't think it's for everyone. I want them to find their path. And just as I, from the earliest ages, knew I wanted to start a business, and I knew I wanted to be a big business, it is a little crazy. I think that there are people who find love and passion for helping, animals, or for being, a doctor in healthcare. And I want everyone to find their path because I think that's what drives purpose. And that's what's going to create people who are fulfilled and happy in life.
You said one thing there. You have to be wired different to make it work. I guess that's what I was trying to figure out. Like, what is that wired differently? Is it just insane ambition? Is it a lack of fear of failure? Is it intelligence in certain areas? Is it people skills? Like, what is the wired different to make it work, and maybe some commonalities of people that were wired different enough to make it work?
I think it's number one, insane ambition. Number two, being able to deal with failure. And number three, to be able to deal with risk. So people thought Elon Musk was crazy when he left PayPal, leveraged all this stuff and started a rocket company and a car company at the same time. But ultimately he was willing to take the risk. And you could argue that he's a bit unique in that sense. Like, it's just extreme risk. But then over time that accumulates. So I think though, for every Elon Musk, there's going to be a lot of other people who tried and failed. So you can't be afraid to fail. So I think it's a very unique thing. And that's why, just like, there's only one Ronaldo or one Michael Jordan, it is being a high performance entrepreneur is like being a high performance athlete. There's a lot of people who are going to try to do it and a lot of people who are not going to make it.
My last question for today, and thank you for joining us, is: do you believe in luck? Like, to become, to build something big, to really add value, is there luck involved at all, or is it all sheer input and decision making?
Absolutely believe that luck is involved, but I also am convicted that you can make your own luck by stacking odds in your favor.
All right, well, that was a really insightful talk. I think me and my co-founder Fivos are early on in our journey, and I think you gave us some nuggets there that we're going to be writing down and implementing. Super impressed with the knowledge you have to share in the career that you've built, and best of luck in the huge journey ahead for Landbase and AppDirect.
Thanks, guys. I know you guys are going to crush it with workflows.
Thank you. Thank you a lot.